Shouldn't take care of it.
Right. My son's because my mother was.
All right. Good evening. I'd like to welcome all of you to the first televised meeting of the Princeton Planning Board. This is a new direction for all of us, and we hope it's going to add to the open aspects of all the presentations before the Planning Board. It is Thursday, September 17th, 2015, and the opening statement is as follows. Pursuant to Section 13 of the Open Public Meetings Act, adequate notice of the time and place of this meeting has been given by prominently posting the 2015 agenda resolution of the regularly scheduled meetings of the Princeton Planning Board. Such notice has been placed on the official bulletin board of the Princeton Municipal Complex and is to be maintained throughout the year by transmitting a copy of such schedule to the Princeton Packet, Town Topics, The Times, Trentonian, and Comcast Media. A copy has been filed with the clerk of Princeton on the 9th day of December 2014. Legal notice of the adoption of said resolution appeared in the December 9th, 2014 edition of the Princeton Packet. Could you call the roll, please?
Ms. Burge, Ms. Capizzoli, Ms. Krummiller,
Here.
Mayor Lempert, Mr. Reed,
Here.
Ms. Spruill, Mrs. Trotman,
Here.
Mrs. Ullman,
Here.
Mrs. Gunning,
Here.
Mr. Cohn,
Here.
Mr. Quinn.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. There are just a couple of announcements. On Monday, the 28th of September, there's going to be a subdivision committee meeting that will be 9:30 in the morning in meeting room B. And on Tuesday, September 29th, that's the following day, there will be a ZARC meeting at 9:30, and that will be in meeting room A. And just not to confuse the two of those, I hope you'll mark your calendars. Are there any other announcements? Anyone? All right, hearing none, why don't we move on to the findings and fact and resolutions. The first one is Rummage and Mann. This is from July 9th of this year. It was a minor subdivision with variances. It should have been included in the packet that you received. Are there any corrections, additions, emendations? Anyone? Hearing none, could I have a motion?
Gail Ullman, I move approval.
Thank you, Ms. Ullman. Is there a second?
Mildred Trotman, second.
Thank you, Ms. Trotman. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Then, see, the next thing in the packet was a professional service agreement. This was for Karen Casey. It's litigation for the Institute for Advanced Study. Were there any questions? Mr. Solo, did you want to say anything about this?
Just briefly, Karen is requesting a $5,000 increase to cover what at the time was remaining trial work and to cover the anticipated appeal. She had indicated at the last minute there were a number of motions filed for amicus groups to intervene in the discussion, which required some additional work. At the hearing on the first appeal, the attorney for the battlefield made it clear they would be appealing, so we're asking again for an additional $5,000 to defend that litigation.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions on that, anyone? If not, could I have a motion?
Second.
Okay, it was moved by Mr. Reed, it was seconded by Ms. Trotman. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Now, you have two sets of minutes that were sent to you. The first was the regular meeting of March 19th of this year. Any corrections, changes, additions, anyone? Okay, hearing none, can I have a motion?
So moved.
Okay, it's moved by Ms. Krummuller,
Second.
second by Ms. Trotman. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Carried. The second set is the regular meeting of April 9th of this year. Again, are there any corrections, additions?
Oh, excuse me, I just accidentally mixed up the meetings because I wasn't at that one, so maybe somebody else should move it.
Okay,
I'll
just-
move.
You want to switch that? That's the first set of minutes, that's March 19th, 2015.
You were present at 19.
She's listed as present.
You were Never mind. All right, let that stand and let's go on to the second set. Additions, corrections, anyone? This is the meeting of April 9th, 2015.
Move approval.
Thank you, Ms. Trotman. Second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Quinn. It's been seconded. Any further comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Good. This brings us to the discussion items, and the first one is the Steering Committee of the Bicycle Master Plan. Lee, do you want to introduce that for us, Mr. Sullivan?
Actually, I'm going to pass it off. I don't know if all of you know Deanna Stockton, the Assistant Municipal Engineer. She's sort of spearheading this effort. The Planning Board and the Master Plan Subcommittee will be providing most of the guidance as we develop a bike plan. There will be development of a larger overall steering committee to provide input from various interest groups. With that, Deanna maybe will explain a little bit. We did receive a grant to cover this work. At the end of the day, I think they're looking to have something that the Planning Board could adopt and amend the circulation element of the master plan to include the bike plan. And with that, Deanna, I'll turn it over to you.
Good evening. Thank you for hosting us tonight. Through the process of trying to implement complete streets in town since it was adopted as part of the master plan in 2012, through engineering, we've tried to identify, design, and construct different demonstration projects. And as I'm sure everybody is aware, there's been some challenges associated with those projects. And one of the comments that we've heard throughout that process was that we do not have a solid bicycle master plan to support some of the design recommendations that the engineering department is putting forth. So we became aware of a program that the New Jersey Department of Transportation has that will assist local municipalities and counties in preparing different types of studies, one of those studies being a bicycle master plan. So in April of this year, we had submitted an application to DOT. It's a competitive program subject to funding, and in the summer we were notified that we had been awarded the grant. The way it works is that DOT has a pool of consultants, and they choose a consultant that can assist us in this process. In our case, we have Parsons Brinkerhoff, who will be assisting us with this. Pete Kramer is here, Reed Sibley, and Dan Turner, all from Parsons Brinkerhoff. We also have a representative of NJDOT in the audience, Bill Revere, who has been instrumental in guiding the process. So up till now, we've had a pre-scoping meeting with DOT and the consultants just to identify more fully a scope of work. And tonight's meeting, the consultants will be providing a kickoff for you so you can see the overall schedule, the scope of work, and what the goal is. Ultimately, we'd like to see this study be endorsed by the planning board, have it endorsed by council, and become adopted as part of the circulation element of the master plan. And that way it gives us a lot of support for the engineering infrastructure projects when we move ahead in trying to complete to do the complete streets, and also when we're looking ahead to grant projects and finding the missing links or the self-contained projects that we can move ahead with to advance the different planning goals that we have in the community. And I just want to add that this was one of the council goals for 2015, was to implement a bicycle master plan study, so I'm very pleased that we were successful with this grant. So with that, I will turn this over to Pete Kramer, and if we can have IT turn on the screen for us, that would be great.
How's that? Can you guys hear me? Okay. All right, Reed, advance the slide. So we're just going to give you a quick presentation to tell you what we're going to do, what our scope of work is, some of the products, and some of the meetings that we're going to have, and the activities that we're going to undertake. So basically our goal is to provide Princeton a plan that helps improve safety, creates a comfortable cycling environment. We try to reach a broad set of cyclists, not just the most experienced, the most skilled, but the largest numbers. That's what we want to do. We want to encourage higher rates of cycling, and as Deanna said, we're trying to advance a complete streets policy. Right now, it really functions as something on paper, but we want to give the town and the professionals a process that they can use to identify appropriate improvements for appropriate streets and maybe tamp down some of the controversy that comes across. So one of the things that people look for is, do you have a plan in place? Do you have a process in place when you identify improvements and try to advance them to the capital improvement program? Next slide, Reed. So these are the things that we're going to produce for you: a bicycle master plan and a network. The master plan will be the process of how you identify and advance specific improvements for specific streets in Princeton. Not every street will be advised for some sort of treatment, but some of the major streets, some of the streets that provide for regional mobility and provide direct access to residential areas, parks, schools, places of worship, downtown, the kind of things that connect people from where they live to where they work and where they go to do things in town. One of the functions of the planning board is to identify appropriate improvements for the capital improvement program, and the plan is a process to do that. And ultimately, we may also provide several ordinances or suggested ordinance, for example, a bicycle parking ordinance that you could fit into your master plan in some way. So typically, as I said, what we try to do is identify improvements that reach the largest number of cyclists. You know, traditionally in New Jersey for the last 20 or 30 years, what we've done is say, provide a wide shoulder or put a sharrow down or a shared lane sign on the side of the road. And those kind of improvements really only address the needs of the highest level, the most skilled, the most fearless, the most enthusiastic, the most confident cyclists. And as you see from the diagram, that's really just maybe 8% or less. People like me, I don't really need a lot of special improvements to the roadway. I feel pretty confident, pretty comfortable. I don't feel a lot of roadway stress, but most people do, and that's that 60%. So what we're trying to do is target improvements that address regular people going to work, people going to school, Saturday morning going downtown to have a cup of coffee. Those are the people that really represent the largest numbers and the largest candidate pool of cyclists in town. I was just in Philadelphia today, and it's not people on racing bikes. It's really people dressed for work, riding at 5 or 10 miles an hour and going to work. And that's what our plan is really designed to focus on. Go back one slide. One of the things that we know from research is that those type of things I mentioned, the typical improvements that have been done, the wide shoulders and the sharrows, most people don't feel comfortable that that's enough to get out on the road. Research tells us that people are looking for some kind of separation, some kind of physical separation from the stress of high-speed traffic, heavy volumes, and the trucks that are associated with any sort of small downtown. So those are the kind of things that we're looking for. We're going to try to identify improvements that provide some separation for people from traffic, And that could be a bike lane with a separated buffer, or it could be an off-street facility as well. And we know from Mercer County in the last 10 or 20 years, the facilities like the DNR Canal and the Lawrence Hopewell Trail are really starting to attract very large numbers, not just of cyclists, but of pedestrians, runners, and people of all sorts of activity. So those are the kind of things that attract people the most, and those are the kind of things that we're going to try to identify for appropriate streets in Princeton. So the things we're going to do is have a comprehensive community outreach program. We're going to start with an existing conditions analysis. We've already looked at some of the data, started our basic mapping. We're going to create a bicycle network and a bicycle implementation plan. Again, it's a process that the township can use to identify when a street comes up for repaving, what kind of improvements could be made to that street to make it safer and more accommodating and less stressful for cyclists. So we're going to start with community engagement. It's community engagement and outreach is something that occurs throughout the study. We have a series of meetings that's on the next slide I'll show you. But really what we're out to do is gather input and feedback from the local representatives. We could sit down, the three of us, and come up with a plan in about 2 months. We could do the whole thing very simply, but it wouldn't be your plan. It would just be a plan that we came up with. So we really need to get input, observations. What do you like? What do you don't like? What are the problem areas? What intersections do you think work well? What streets think you work well? And we'll use that information to identify the appropriate type of improvements for Princeton. So these are the outreach elements that we're going to have. We'll be the planning board 4 times, including tonight. We have a local steering advisory committee. There'll be 3 of those meetings, 3 public meetings, and I believe, Deanna, we've confirmed now the first public meeting would be November 12th, and it would be at 6:30 p.m. to about 8:30 p.m., and Deanna says she has a couple potential sites, depending on how many people we expect, so we can set that pretty quickly. But you can put that date on your calendar right now, November 12th at 6:30. We're also going to have a series of informal focus group interview meetings. You have quite a few organizations, Princeton Future, all sorts of advocacy groups in town. We want to sit down with a lot of those folks and get their input as well. Sometimes, some people work best in a public meeting. Some people work best in an informal setting. So that's why we're going to have both things, public forums and then other opportunities to sit down with advocacy groups and some with the university and some of the other groups and get input directly from them. We've also been to the National Night Out on August 4th. Reed and Dan were at that event, and we got some good feedback there. We also use a crowdsourcing tool called Wiki Mapping. It's an online mapping tool, and we'll create an online address that the town can distribute and advertise, and people can go to this Wiki Mapping site and put comments, inputs, observations, recommendations, whatever you feel is an appropriate comment onto this website, and that'll be another thing. So we've got a series. We have the planning board, steering committee, public meetings, the informal groups, the public event at the night out, plus the crowdsourcing. So we really have a comprehensive outreach program. We do a detailed, comprehensive analysis. We use the tool called level of stress analysis. Traditionally, we've looked, as I said, just at those kind of improvements that focus on the most skilled cyclists. But this level of stress analysis really examines how comfortable people feel on the roadway, and that's how we get at those larger target audiences. So that's really the basis of our analysis. We also do a crash analysis. That's typically the accident data that we get from New Jersey DOT, and it helps us identify hot spots of crashes and problems where there's conflicts between cyclists and drivers. We're going to look at your current bicycle facilities, and we're going to do that in various ways. In fact, on Sunday, we're going to do a ride with one of the advocacy groups and get some firsthand feedback from them. And then we're going to map the key destinations and look at various previous study. In fact, today, Deanna and I looked at the Carmel study, and I got a lot of good information from that. So again, the existing conditions analysis is a number of different tools that we put together to get a good feeling for what the conditions are and where some of the opportunities are for improvements in the future. We're going to create a bicycle network. We're not just going to look at streets and say, oh, let's put 3/4 of a mile a bike lane here that goes nowhere, or maybe put a half a mile improvement on a trail that connects nothing to nothing. What we're trying to do is create a network that connects where people live with where they want to go. Like, as I said, schools, shopping, worship, downtown, all the kind of things that make for a lively, active community. We also want to leverage some of the off-road connections that you have in town. And again, for all these things, community input is really an essential part of the process. And this is one of the kind of products that we will create for the plan, sample cross-section that's going to give, for a street of a certain type of width, what can fit on that street safely and adequately. This is, the really ideal cross-section where you have room for 2 travel lanes, on-street parking, and you can see how the bike lanes are on the inside of the parking, not on the outside of the parking. And again, that gets at that idea of where cyclists are more comfortable. They're more comfortable away from the stress of traffic and high speeds. And then roll with the planning board. As I said, for you guys, we want to get input from you, and you'll get all our draft work products, and we'll get feedback from you. One of the principal purposes of the planning board is to bring stakeholders into the study. So anyone that you come across that you think would be beneficial and could have good input for us, we'd like to hear about that. Ultimately, you're going to adopt the master plan and the process that the town is going to use to identify appropriate improvements. And as I said, one of the functions of the planning board is to advance a capital improvement program. So overseeing implementation of the plan will be one of your principal responsibilities. So the timeline is, we have about a 9-month time frame. We have quite a few meetings that we're already getting underway. Right now, this is the ideal time for us to gather data. We could have started in July or August, but really there isn't as much activity. Once the school year starts, once you get a few weeks into the school year, the traffic patterns have settled down to a predictable pattern, a predictable equilibrium, and it's a perfect time for us to go out and start collecting data of how people are getting around town. So we'll have, until around December, we'll be getting our data, evaluating conditions, and over the winter, we'll start identifying appropriate improvements. We'll come back to you guys several times, and by next spring, we'll have a draft plan, and we'll be adopting that plan by June of next year. And so this is where we're at right now. As I said, we've started our data collection. We're about to get our wiki mapping site online. We're working right now with Deanna to put together a steering committee. We have our date now for November 12th for our first steering committee meeting. And we're starting to put together some lists of some of the focus groups that we're going to be talking to as well. And in this fall, we're already taking some of those products, some of that analysis that we've done of streets and networks and crash data, and start to put together our draft existing conditions analysis. So I think that's it. Is that it, Reed? Next slide. So if you have any questions, otherwise we'll be back in a couple months.
Go ahead, Jim.
Yes, sir.
Do you have recommendations in terms of the composition of the steering committee? Seen done in other?
Yeah, we've already talked to Deanna and looked over the list that she's put together. It's kind of still in flux, but there's typical a mix of citizens, some of the institutions in town, some decision makers, maybe some of the professionals from the municipality as well. As I said, Princeton is kind of a place where you have a lot of organizations, a lot of active people, organizations like Princeton Future and many other groups, many nonprofits and advocacy groups. There's no shortage of people who have opinions. So those are the kind of people that we're going to get onto the steering committee. So, but we can share that list, and if you have any recommendations, we'll be glad to take them.
David, what we're trying to do in creating the steering committee is obviously we'll have some staff, police, engineering, planning representation at the steering committee meetings, but we're also looking to all of our users of roadways to have them be part of this process, to look for the groups that can't advocate for themselves. And there's, we have some nonprofit groups that then help advocate for certain groups within the community. We're trying to look for like the 8-year-old to the 80-year-old within Princeton that can use these improvements as we go forward. So it's in a draft process right now, and as we move ahead, we'll share what the composition is. But essentially, we're trying to look at all groups. We're looking at the elder groups, we're looking at our, our Latino community, we're looking at whether bike ped, traffic and transportation. It's quite a long list right now, so that's why that's one thing that we haven't had a conversation about, that we will be refining the list, and it may be that some items move over to focus group meetings rather than being part of the steering committee.
Yeah, typically you have about 10 to 15 people on the steering committee. As Deanna said, we're really well past that number already, so it may make sense to move some of those folks to some of the focus group meetings. Just can be cumbersome to run a meeting with that many participants. But also, I find that a lot of those meetings are scheduled during the day, and some people just can't make them for work commitments. So we might have 15 or 18, but get 10 or 12, and 10 or 12 is a nice number. Once you start getting larger, it becomes a little more cumbersome, but we'll find a way to make that work. Deanna mentioned the police. Actually, our experience is that when the police are actively involved in this kind of study, when they recognize that bicycle and pedestrian safety are a public safety and a public health issue, that's when you really start to change, when you try to start creating a community that's safe and accessible for all your residents. That's really a great thing. So that's certainly one representative that we would want to have on the steering committee.
Okay. Jenny, I think you had your hand up.
Do you have experience in a town like ours that's old with narrow streets and big trees?
Oh, sure. Well, I've been coming to Princeton since 1977, so I'm pretty familiar with the experience here. I live right next door. I was in Philadelphia today, and the size and scale are very different. But Princeton and Philadelphia share narrow, small, a lot of one-way streets, and the streets there are filled with people, so cycling. So there's the diversity in New Jersey is tremendous, but we certainly have plenty of experience with those kind of conditions.
And are you dealing with all the streets, the county and state-owned streets also?
Yeah, we'll look basically at all the streets. Typically a large percentage of the residential streets are 25 miles an hour on low traffic streets, so we really don't do much with those. But we won't leave anything out. We won't leave a county street out or a state highway. Certainly there's not much you can do with 206. It is what it is, but a lot of the other streets in town are really good candidates for potential improvements. But we'll look at every street, and we'll run it through our process and figure out what the best type of improvements are. I think, Mr. Reed, you had your hand up?
Tim, I think you had your hand
I
up.
just made a comment. This isn't the first time that the community has put money up to bring in outside consultants.
Yes, sir.
And I want you to suggest that you approach it with a certain degree of realism as to what you find here. And Ms. Carmiller mentions the narrow streets that we already have. We've hired consultants before, and they come back enthusiastic for putting bike lanes on all the major streets.
Mm-hmm.
And then we find that just doesn't work, and you get into battles with whether you're going to have a bike lane or a pedestrian path, or whether you're going to have parking, or you're going to take parking off and put in bike lanes. And those efforts fell by the wayside because they weren't approached with a certain degree of realism.
Sure.
I noticed that you had a cross-section of a street with a sidewalk, a grass edging, bike lanes, and a couple of lanes of traffic. There's only about one street in town.
Probably no street in Princeton that actually fits
Only
that
Harrison
cross-section.
Street by the shopping center would be able to accommodate a cross-section like that.
Right. Well, one of the first things we'll do, and I don't want to put together a plan that can't be implemented, and we're not going to do that.
That the DOT funded, and
Yes,
the
sir.
DOT did on 206 from Lawrenceville up through up to Rocky Hill, in terms of
changing the speed limits.
bike access on those major highways. And then getting into strong debates as to whether we want to focus the bicycle riders on those state highways or whether we want alternate routes that direct the bicyclists elsewhere. So I just hope that there's that degree of realism.
Sure. Well, one of the first things we do is look at the typical cross sections, and we're just working on a study in Ironbound section of Newark right now, which is actually also fairly similar in a lot of ways to Princeton. A lot of narrow streets, a lot of one-way streets, a lot of streets that don't have a lot of right-of-way to work with, and we are finding opportunities there to make things work. I think in that case they can be more aggressive than you can, but we're going to work very closely with Deanna and the engineering staff and the planning staff to come up with things that can be implemented. I don't want to come up with a plan that looks great but doesn't make any sense. So we're going to look at the typical cross sections and what the widths are, and it's very obvious. You need a certain width to add a bike lane to a street, and if you don't have that and you can't change the parking, then that's not a street that we're going to recommend something on. So that's, we've already talked about several examples of streets in town, and I think we have a pretty good idea of what the professionals are trying to accomplish, and that's, I fully agree with what you're saying. I read the plan. I know Charlie Carmel very well, and I saw a number of things in there that I would like to know if any of those things happen. I'm sure most of them didn't, but that's a good starting point for us. We don't just want to know what the conditions are. We want to know what the constraints are. And this is a place where 90% of the streets are going to be constrained, and then there'll be about 10% left, and out of that 10%, maybe half will be possible, and out of that, a smaller number will advance. So I'd rather have a small subset of things that can actually work than, a network-wide of every street in Princeton recommended for something that just doesn't fit. It's a waste of time.
Okay.
So
Tim, I
I
think
fully understand what you're
you're the
saying.
next one.
Sure. I was wondering, I'm assuming that as part of this process, you're going to be reaching out to motor vehicle drivers, people who are uncomfortable sharing the road with cyclists.
Sure.
Are there strategies to identify motorists only, especially people who are uncomfortable or angry? We have a lot of...
We don't have that in New Jersey. There's no
What's
angry...
No, I mean, we have
Drivers who think they
a
own the
lot of
road.
people who drive into town and out of town every day to work in Princeton, and I've been in 3 crashes in the past 5 or 6 years, and they've all been with people who are commuting either to or from the university.
Sure.
So I'm just wondering what strategies you have to reach out to the driver-only population. I mean, it's easy to get Bike Advocate to rally people who love to ride bikes, but reaching the motorists, do you have any experience or any strategies for?
I don't know how we got anything. I mean, there's no specific way to do that, just an understanding of what those conditions are. Part of what we would do would be look at the crash data and see where most of the accidents are occurring. We would also probably stay away from commuting routes as recommended bike routes. A lot of the commuting routes in town are pretty narrow, and there's not a lot you can do with them. As I said, that's why we're really going to focus primarily on the facilities that are separated from traffic, or the facilities that are off-road. I'm not a big fan of the Sharrow. That's really the last alternative. It's almost kind of a cop-out. Some places it's all you can do, and that's fine, but we're going to try to find things that are separated from traffic. So that's, I think that's what we're going to look for. I'm not going to put a bike lane on a street that's 29 feet wide and there's just no room to do it. It just doesn't make any sense. So I think that's part of the strategy, is to avoid those conditions. One way to, I take a systems process. One way to avoid a problem is to design it out of the system, and we're not going to try to create problems through what we're doing. We're trying to make things a little bit safer. So it's sort of a roundabout way of answering your question. But I don't think there's aside from, having been a driver for, 35 years, I'm pretty familiar with, I've seen people on Route 1 eating a bowl of cereal while they're driving down Route 1. So there's nothing that can happen here that I haven't seen myself.
And just any way that we could engage motorists and
Sure.
have a dialogue with them that doesn't involve them shouting out their car windows that we should get off the road,
Right.
or us shouting back at them, I think would be helpful.
Okay.
So to the extent that you can identify people who
Yeah.
have made public statements maybe about, cyclists not belonging on the road, it might be helpful to reach out to them.
Those are the kind of people that typically go to a public meeting. People go to a public meeting for controversy, and if they hear about something they don't like, they'll show up. They don't show up for a policy plan. They show up because of controversy. So if they see an announcement of something that they don't like, they will show up and share their opinion. So that's one way we'll do it. This is not going to be a plan that's invisible. It's going to be a plan that's very much in the public, and I think that's one of the ways we'll get that kind of feedback.
Okay. Any other
Okay.
questions?
Yes, sir.
Is your PowerPoint presentation going to be available on the website?
Sure, Deanna will share that, yeah.
Is
Yeah,
it up now?
All our presentations and all our draft products would be available on whatever public forum. That's one good way for us to get feedback.
I'll have it posted to the municipal website tomorrow morning. I have a draft version, but they came with an updated version tonight, so I'll have it posted.
And Deanna has my contact, and you can always reach out to us whenever anything comes up.
Great.
Okay,
This is exciting.
thanks.
Yeah.
Look forward to meeting with you again soon.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. All right. The next item for discussion is an ordinance referral. This is an increase in the Zoning Board of Adjustment alternates. Mr. Bridger, are you going to tell us about that?
I was going to let Lee introduce it. I'm just going to share that we have had a very busy year on the zoning board. We've had a lot of use variances that require 5 affirmative votes, and we've had several times where people have been ill the day of the meeting. We've had to cancel meetings, and this would just help us keep an orderly schedule. But I will let Lee make the formal introduction.
I don't know if there's a whole lot more to say after that. The municipal land use law does permit the zoning board to have 4 alternates, and that's all this ordinance does, really, is allow them to do that. As Derek said, it's to make it easier for the zoning board members and for the applicants so that we have a quorum. The board needs to make a finding that is consistent, I think, with the master plan and recommend it to council, and we would ask that you do so.
Okay. Any questions, anybody? Would somebody like to make a motion finding this consistent with the master plan and recommendable to council?
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Cormiller. Is there a second?
Second.
Let's take David this time. Second by Mr. Cohn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. And this will be sent back to council then with our recommendation. All right. I think at this point, I have to recuse myself. My husband is a university employee, and we are going to be hearing from the university. So I will turn the meeting over to Vice Chair Allman. You want to move over here?
Are you coming back?
I'm coming back for the last one.
Everybody knows who I am. Good evening, everyone. The next item is the annual report from Princeton University Tiger Transit. the demand management and parking system. I guess this must be about the 7th or 8th year that the university has been doing these annual reports. Mr. Bridger, will you be addressing it?
Yeah, Lee and I were talking, we weren't sure if it was the 7th or 8th year, but it's been quite a few years. And I'd like to go right into the report if it's all right with the board.
Talk into the mic.
Okay. Well, thank you for the opportunity to present my review of the 2013-2014 annual performance report for the university's Tiger Transit Traffic Demand Management and Parking Report. I'd like to give a brief summary of my report, and I'm going to begin with the Tiger Transit Report. Ridership for the period was 548,800 passenger trips. This represents a 3.9 increase over the previous year, which was lower due to a number of hurricanes. This year's number was also affected somewhat by winter storm cancellations that resulted in loss of 7,700 passenger trips. The university's report also touches on the environmental impact of the system. They've utilized the Greater Mercer Transportation Management Association to study the environmental impact of Tiger Transit, and specifically, they're looking at the impact on the region of carbon dioxide. The carbon footprint analysis is based on two fuel types, the B20, which is a 20% biofuel and 80% diesel fuel, versus diesel, and they look at two commuter types, those riding the Tiger Transit versus single occupancy vehicles. The Tiger Transit fleet operates 40 passenger buses that run on the B20 fuel, which typically reduces carbon emissions from 15 to 20%. The Carnegie Center 701 line and the Forrestal PPL lines use smaller 14-passenger diesel buses. This is a change from last year when all the buses used the B20 fuel. Although the diesel emits more carbon emissions than the B20, the change was made due to the fewer number of passengers on these routes. The use of the B20 fuel resulted in Tiger Transit reducing carbon emissions by 269,000 pounds of CO2 when compared with the use of regular diesel. The report also estimates that approximately 447,000 pounds of CO2 were emitted by using single transit buses, and less pounds of CO2 were emitted by using the Tiger Transit buses versus single occupancy vehicle. The use of buses rather than single occupancy vehicle resulted in the elimination of 545,000 car trips annually, and that reduces congestion in general in the area. The report also reviews community outreach from the university. The plan is pretty similar to last year. They've used smartphones. The university is also involved with the trust fund management. An example of this is the new vehicles for the town in the freebie bus service. They awarded funds to buy the new freebie bus. The university is also actively involved in several regional committees that work groups such as the Central Jersey Transportation Fund, the Princeton Public Transportation Task Force. The university is also an active member in the first public-private bus partnership in New Jersey, which is responsible for the operation of New Jersey Transit's 655 Princeton-Plainsboro bus route that serves the hospital. I'd just like to give an update on this. This report covers basically the academic year from 2013 to 2014, and as of September 1st, 2015, the 655 line was discontinued. The university's Forrestal PPL line currently stops at the hospital and will continue to stop there. The university is investigating adding additional trips this fall on Nassau Street to better accommodate community members traveling to the hospital. In August 2013, the university began a complimentary service to the Princeton Junction rail station to assist travelers during the construction of the new rail station. Over 80,000 trips were provided free between August 2013 and June 2014. The report also reviews the communication efforts of the university. The Tiger Transit smartphone pages, it's a smartphone application. They had 108,000 hits during the academic year. They also continue to provide travel guides, maps, parking maps and Tiger Transit maps. The university continually monitors the overall system performance and data collection. The methods are pretty much unchanged from last year, but they continually look at ways where they can tweak the system and address inadequacies and increase efficiencies. All the individual bus lines continue to operate at a similar level as they did in the past year. The lines have fluctuated somewhat based on construction and different patterns of students and the population it serves. Overall, I would say that Tiger Transit continues to be a successful operation. The university also has a transportation demand management system, which includes carpools. Last year there were 76 carpools with 142 participants. They utilized van pools. There were 5 vans in operation. Average daily occupancy rate was 85%. The use of the vans resulted in a reduction of 5.52 tons of carbon monoxide and 144 tons of carbon dioxide, and a loss of 12,500 commuter trips annually. They have a mass transit program that they subsidize. There are 24 participants in that. They also have a biking program. Last year there were 193 participants in that. And they have a car sharing program. It's the WE car sharing program, which was introduced in 2010. And there are currently 750 members in that, and that was a 182 member increase over the previous year. And the final aspect of their plan is parking. Currently, the data indicates that there's a total of 3,944 parking spaces, serving a university population of 5,938. This represents an increase of 234 over the past year. Based on the vacancy rate of 4.8 or 189 spaces, the parking plan appears to adequately accommodate the commuter population. In closing, I would say that the university's Tiger Transit, transportation demand management, and parking programs are all operating at a satisfactory level. The university continues to monitor and adjust the system to deal with ongoing construction projects and shifting passenger patterns. Staff has not received any complaints regarding any of the facets of the system during the last year, and it seems to be operating quite successfully. I would be glad to answer any questions, and the university's team is here as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Board members, are there any questions for Mr. Bridger? Yes, Mrs. Cromwell.
Well, I was just curious about how the bike rental program at the Dinky is doing. Are people using it? And I missed it in the report if it was in there.
No, I'm sorry, I can't really speak to that. It wasn't specifically addressed in the report, but I don't know if the university, I'm sure they have someone here that could address that.
Although it's not part of this report, it's doing very well. We have close to 300 members who have joined. We have an average rate of over 40 rentals per month, so it's been very, 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 very well received by the community. So we're looking to see how we can enhance some of that bike share within the community as well as on the university campus.
Great, thanks.
Thanks.
I believe this is Kim Jackson, who
Yes,
is our travel guru from the university.
Thank you.
Any other questions for either Ms. Jackson or, yes, David Cohen?
Yeah, I was curious about the Tiger Paw, that shuttle service out to West Windsor. Does that run only when the Dinky is not running, or is it sometimes competing with the Dinky? And is there any projection of when that's going to stop running?
I'm going to defer to Kim.
The Tiger Paw bus stopped running November 14th, I believe, the day the train station opened. So the Tiger Paw bus was only for that period that the station had moved further down, and it was run in conjunction with the train service. So it left a little earlier than the train, so it could make it at the same time, but it was kind of complementary to the train service. So it's been over since November 14.
Are there any other comments? Ms. Jackson, Cecilia Burge, who is a member of both the board and the Environmental Commission, asked if there's an electronic version of your report that she could share with the Environmental Commission, partly because you've singled out really interesting environmental
We
information.
can definitely get our copy.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Reed.
This is a question for our own engineering staff. This report put a big emphasis this year on the use of biofuels as a 20% mixture with diesel fuels to basically produce clean diesel. Is the municipality doing the same thing with its vehicles?
Unfortunately, I don't know the answer to that. I'm not sure what they do.
I'm not sure what the freebie does, but I know the cars are gasoline that we use, so.
Because we're in the process of buying a new freebie vehicle, and the question came up as to whether that it is a diesel vehicle, but what kind of diesel are you doing? And I know we have a lot of other vehicles around town in which we're using diesel.
I think that
And maybe we can learn from the university's
That's a good point.
experience.
I think we were talking about that earlier, wondering if the engines are specifically made for that fuel, or if regular diesel can use that fuel, regular diesel engines.
Thank you, Kim.
Even though that's not your job, we appreciate knowing.
Okay, I'm not an expert on it, but newer buses are being built with engines, even though they're diesel fuel, that can run on biodiesel fuel. Older buses, not as much, but definitely newer buses have the engine capacity to run on both.
Okay, that's good, thanks. So maybe ours will be able to.
I just had a further comment on that. I think the reason for the 20% mix is because older vehicles can run with a certain amount of biodiesel, but it can't be too rich, and maybe the newer vehicles can run on a richer mix of biodiesel.
Are there any other questions or comments on the report? If not, I think our job is only to approve this. Is that correct? Do we need to vote on that, or can we just?
I don't think we do. I think it's just a report.
Generally
It's required in the
accepted.
ordinance that they submit a report to the board at a public meeting, basically.
All right, thank you very much. Is that right? Yeah, it was. Okay. Our next application is also Princeton University, a preliminary final major site plan for the child care facility that's on the East Campus. I believe we reviewed a concept review of this several months ago. I think the document in the minutes is in this, and so we're here to hear the whole story. Mr. Solo?
Yes, Mr. Solo, do you swear or affirm to testify truthfully in this application?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Thank you, and good evening. As the chair indicated, this is a preliminary and final site plan with variances for Princeton University, their child care facility. You did look at a very similar plan as a concept a few months ago. What I'd like to do is just give you a very brief overview. You can see the university is setting up, I guess, with a PowerPoint presentation to go into their testimony. But let me first orient everybody to the site. I'm going to be using sheet CE6, which is the site layout plan. for the project that's in your packet. The application involves a lot that's 140 acres. However, the area of disturbance where the parking and the child care facility will be located is approximately 3 acres in size. Just to orient you on the map, north is to the top. Western Way would be way up here, about 700 feet to the north. As you're looking at it to the east and the right, this is Broadmead. To the left and to the west is Fitz-Randolph. Faculty Road is way down here at the bottom of the map. There's a baseball field to the west, and over here is a swim club, just to get you a little bit further oriented. The university is proposing to construct a one-story, 17,500 square foot child care facility. This will replace the existing facility that's located at 171 Broadmead, just about up in here, in this general area in here, just beginning at the end of the map to the north. The new child care facility will provide space for 180 children. They will range from infants to preschool. The existing child care facility on Broadmead consists of 2 centers, the U Now and the U League. Their combined student population is 196 children, so it's going to be a little bit smaller. The new center will have 6 infant rooms, 5 toddler rooms, 4 preschool rooms, as well as space for different types of activities and for staff work areas. The outdoor playing areas, I should have backed up a little bit. I gave you Fitz-Randolph, Broadmead. There's a private road run by the university. It's a connector road that runs along the north in this area, and we'll talk about how that's going to be redesigned. The building itself is shown in this ugly brown color, and then the play areas, which I just mentioned, are to the south of the building. The outdoor areas will be tailored for each age group and separated as well with fencing. The existing private drive, which is highlighted in a lovely purple color and labeled as parking lot 22, will be redesigned. It will become a 2-way road between Broadmead and Fitz-Randolph and provide parking for 45 spaces. The parking has been designated as drop-off and pickup for the new daycare, and you can see on the map there are a number of points where sidewalks connect to the parking area so that the parents can drop their kids off at the daycare center. The building itself will be designed to a LEED Silver standard according to the application, and the application indicates that the staff for the child care facility will be assigned to a university lot in the area, not necessarily lot 21. The proposal is in the former township's E1 zone. The use is permitted. There is one request for a variance. It's for the parking space dimensions. They're proposing 9 by 18, and 9 by 19 is required. As a way of background, this is a variance which the board has granted on numerous occasions to the university with the idea that a slightly smaller space than 9 by 18 is probably better and results in less impervious coverage, but it's still more than adequate to provide a parking space. A traffic report has been submitted with the application. It's been reviewed by the board's traffic expert. There's a report from Brian Stankus in your packet of IH Consulting. He concurs with the findings of the report that because there will be slightly fewer children present in the new facility, the overall traffic load on roads in the immediate area should be slightly reduced. Both the municipal engineer and the traffic consultant have suggested that the access drives be constructed like a driveway with a sidewalk continuing along Fitz-Randolph and Broadmead, and that's right here. And what they're really asking for is, I think the plan shows basically an asphalt drive in as if it's a road, and what they'd like to see is the concrete sidewalk extended across the driveway. We've also suggested that the university consider moving some of the bike parking that's provided to the overhang of the existing building so that it would provide some covered parking bicycle parking storage, excuse me. 17 trees will be removed as part of the project. The site plan indicates approximately 36 new trees will be planted. The parking lot, you can see, has an unusual shape to it. That's being done to preserve. There's some very beautiful, very large trees in all these areas where there are cutouts to preserve the trees, and we agree with the university design to try to preserve those trees as well. Stormwater control is being provided for the site. It's using vegetated swales, inlets, and a biobasin. The engineer has reviewed that, and it does comply with our ordinance. I think they have asked for a couple of technical amendments as well. The board's advisory committees have reviewed this, and I don't really see members from them, so I'm going to take a moment just to sort of highlight their numerous comments. SPRAB had a number of comments. They agree and recommend that the variance should be granted. They indicated an agreement with the municipal engineer regarding the driveway entrance and sidewalks. They have suggested that a 6-foot wide sidewalk be constructed wherever the sidewalk abuts the parking so that you allow for car overhang. They've questioned whether the crosswalk in the middle of Lot 22 makes sense. There's really no sidewalk that's connecting it. Where's the crosswalk? Is it showing up here? There's not a sidewalk on either side. They've also asked that the sidewalk along the north side is necessary because it appears to interfere with some of the tree protection, and they've suggested that we consider eliminating that sidewalk. They've asked that the university consider moving the building to the west. There are a few trees along Broadmead that they're worried may be impacted during construction. There is a concern with converting Lot 22 from one-way to two-way, and I've asked that the university discuss what those impacts may be on the local road network. They've suggested that the university consider eliminating the spillway and reduce the height of the berm to naturalize the landform, and we'll hear from them, from the university regarding that. They've asked some revisions on the lighting plan, that the chain link fence be painted a dark color, that a note on sheet L100, which is on the landscape plan, be corrected to reflect the chain link fence that's proposed, and that shrubs or ground cover instead of mulch beds be provided along the landscape area, and consider that they protect the trees in lawn areas so that the lawnmowers don't hurt them. The Environmental Commission had a number of recommendations, and again, if you'll tolerate me, I'll keep going. They've encouraged the university to seek either a gold or platinum LEED. They do applaud them for doing LEED silver, but have requested that they consider a gold or platinum standard. They suggested the coordination of the tree protection with the utility plan to make certain that the trees are not impacted by utilities. Suggested including vegetated swales along the parking area to mitigate the flow from the parking lot, that the university consider permeable pavers, that an integrated pest management plan be developed for the site, if the university should provide adequate space for waste, recycling, and composting. They should evaluate high-efficiency single-flush toilets. They've requested the university to evaluate using ways to improve the energy efficiency of the building. They also suggest providing secure and covered bike parking at the site. They've suggested that an electronic vehicle charging station be provided for the facility, and that an indoor air quality plan be developed. They've asked that the university recycle up to 75% of the demolition materials, that they avoid any what's called red list material, and there is a list of what those are in their PEC memo, that the university should establish a green cleaning policy, and finally that they use green building materials and finishes, and in their report they do provide some examples of what they're talking about for those materials. That's a summary of the application, most of the staff issues. Mr. Bridger was here. Mr. West is here, our municipal land use engineer, to answer any additional questions that you may have before we turn it over to the applicant. With that, Madam Chair, I don't know if you have questions for myself or the staff.
Thank you. Let me ask Mr. Bridger and Mr. West, do you have anything to add to Lee's report?
No, I think Lee covered everything. I agree. Thank you.
Let me swear the two of you in, so to the extent questions come up, you are ready to be sworn in. Gentlemen, do you swear or affirm to testify truthfully in this application?
Yes, sir, I do. I do.
Thank you.
Board members, do you have any questions for Mr. Solo?
Fine.
Thank you, Lee.
Turn it over to the applicant.
PB1, Lee?
Oh, yes, sheet CE6 that's colored will label PB1. Thanks.
While Lee is doing that, I'd like to point out one sort of process thing, and that's that in addition to our the board's professional advisors, a large number of citizens are involved in previewing these plans, most plans, before they ever get to us. It includes the Shade Tree Commission, which has 10 members, the Environmental Commission, which has 9 members, the Site Plan Review Committee, which has 5 members, and that's before it gets here. So when an application is well prepared, everybody is a much happier group of people, but there are quite a few people involved. It's important to notice that. Mr. McCoy, Mr. Grazia, who are...
Great. I guess I'll start us off. Thank you. Good evening. For the record, my name is Christopher DeGrazia from the law firm of Drinker, Biddle, and Reith, and I know Alan's going to ask me, so to the extent that I swear or provide any testimony, I swear and affirm I will tell the truth.
And maybe we'll swear in Mr. McCoy as he's sitting there as well. Mr. McCoy, do you swear or affirm to testify truthfully? I do.
And why don't we have Tom O'Shea, our engineer, sworn in?
Tom as well. Mr. O'Shea, you heard the question?
I do.
Thank you.
Did I do?
Thank you. As Lee mentioned, the application before you this evening is for a preliminary and final site plan for a child care facility with a related variance based on parking stall size. Princeton University has a child care center at 171 Broadmead. As part of university campus review and evaluation, they took a look at that facility and determined that due to the age and condition of the building, it would not meet future needs of child care services for the university. And that's why we're here this evening. The university would like to build a brand new facility, and they want to do it immediately across the street. In a minute, we'll go through the presentation. As Lee mentioned, some of it may be familiar to you because we were here in January with a concept review. What you're going to see is essentially the same plan and the same design. However, it's been further refined and modified based on comments we received from this board as well as from your professionals and committees. So we started with a plan that we thought was great, and we have something now that's even better. And with that, I'd like to have our first witness, well, he's already sworn in, and I'd like to introduce Ron McCoy, Princeton University architect. He's appeared before this board many, many times.
Good evening. Well, I think Mr. Solo and Mr. DeGrazia have introduced the project enough, so I'm going to just jump right into an explanation of the design. Assuming you may not remember everything from the concept review several months ago, I'll start from scratch. First, let me say a couple of things about the design team that we have assembled on the project, in particular, Mary Ann Thompson Architects of Boston. and Michael Van Valkenburg Associates. Marianne Thompson Architects is a very good architectural firm with expertise in early childhood education facilities. And obviously that programmatic expertise is one of the reasons we selected her firm. She also has a particular architectural skill in creating, I'd say, very intimate, warm, and beautifully scaled and crafted pieces of architecture. And we knew that this building was going to be part of a residential neighborhood, and we wanted an architect to bring all those skills to the design. Michael Van Valkenburg Associates is the landscape architect for all of the projects, all of the landscape projects we do on the campus. Have been working with us for about 9 years, and the consistency of the landscape vocabulary across all of our projects is a priority, and so they've brought their expertise to this project like we would do any other campus project. This slide indicates the location of the site. I think everybody's fairly familiar with it. I'm pointing here to 171 Broadmead, which is the location of the current child care facility. And just to the south of that facility, of the existing facility, is where we're proposing the location of the new child care facility. A couple of photographs here from that parking lot, the existing parking lot on the site, one looking to the north toward 171 Broadmead, the other one looking to the south across the grass. I thought it was also important to show the sidewalk master plan that the university developed in 2010. And when this plan was developed, you'll see these routes, which were sidewalks at that time that we had intended or had proposed to enhance. And I'm happy to say that we have, in that period since 2010, made all of these improvements. We've completed them all. And I would also point out that we've just completed the intersection on Faculty Road, the vehicular intersection at Broadmead and Faculty Road. So we've been working on this area in large part to make the town and the university more pedestrian and bicycle friendly. And that's part of the setting for the child care building, because we definitely want to encourage parents and their children to walk and bike to the facility. This slide illustrates the pattern of the sun across the sky during the day, and I'm using it to make a point that from probably day one in working with Marianne Thompson, that she made a priority to organize the building and design the building in a sustainable way, and one that would take advantage of solar orientation, natural sunlight, and air patterns through the building. So you'll see that the building here is diagrammatically located and organized into two wings that orient toward the south. The majority of the classrooms then orient toward the south. We have overhangs that will cut off the warm summer sun, but let the light in during the rest of the season. That's a sort of strategy of passive design. And then all the playgrounds will be located on the south of the site as well. So the playgrounds will be getting lots of daylight and sunlight. This is a site plan that so I'm going to spend a little bit of time focusing on this site plan to orient everybody, and I'll walk through some of the comments that are made in the reports. I'll provide some responses to them as I walk through the design and the site plan. I'll also at the end more specifically go through those reports and point out areas that we have that we're not fully complying with or fully accepting, so that there's a record of that. The parking area here at the north end of the site, we're calling it Lot 22. It will be managed by our Parking and Transit Office, and it currently is a roadway that connects Broadmead to Fitz-Randolph. We're transforming it into a parking lot, and that's a subtle but important distinction, because our goal here is to reduce the speed of traffic through that area. And so by providing curb cuts at either end and providing two-way traffic instead of one-way traffic, we will be able to slow down the speed of traffic through that parking lot. It'll be like any typical parking lot. When you enter those parking lots, traffic slows down. The other important feature about the parking lot, as was said earlier, is that it's really designed around the mature existing London plane trees. And the goal there is to preserve the trees and take advantage of their character as they really define the quality of the site. So to the greatest extent possible, we've tried to preserve those trees. There is a sidewalk on the north side that we're showing in the design that overlays on the location of the existing sidewalk. One of the recommendations is to increase it to 6 feet. We prefer to keep it at 4 feet, but primarily to protect this particular stand of pine trees in the northeast corner of the site. On the south side of the parking lot, we are increasing the sidewalk to 6 feet along that length because we don't have the problem of interfering with the existing trees. There's also another pathway that meanders across the site connecting Broadmead to Fitzrandolph, and it provides access to the entry porch of the building. And then there are a series of pathways that connect the parking lot directly to that entry porch or to this meandering pathway that cuts across the site. You'll see the building located here. We have moved the building since we presented here at Concept Review, and this was reviewed by SPRAB. And in the SPRAB presentation, they agreed with the decision that we made to move the building further to the west. It was 34 feet from Broadmead. We increased that to 49 feet. The way the building is organized in terms of its form is that it's also quite low where it meets Broadmead, and we'll show some renderings that show how the mass of the building when it meets Broadmead is a very modest scaled mass. There is an existing alley of trees along the sidewalk at Broadmead, and there have been some comments about the concern for these trees. If we don't think these trees will be damaged, but if any trees are damaged by or in the way of construction, we would transplant and relocate those trees. So those trees are not going to be lost as a result of construction. On the south side of the building, it's basically the fenced playground area. There are 3 separate playgrounds: one for the toddlers, one for the one for the infants, one for the toddlers, one for the preschoolers. These 3 playgrounds have a fence that goes all the way around the perimeter, and as the report suggested, we've changed that design of that fence to a dark-colored fence. The playgrounds are separated from each other for programmatic reasons, but visually you'll be able to see across all of those playground areas. And then at the far southern boundary of the site, we have a landscape-based stormwater management system so that we can manage all of the stormwater on site and actually discharge less water across the site than what currently exists. I think you may know that the university maintains a very strong stormwater management plan, one that exceeds local and state regulations, and we are complying with our own standards, which are the highest for all of our stormwater management policies. This is a enlargement of that entry area. So this is the front porch of the school. You can't quite see it in this diagram, but there is a relatively large overhang over the entry area. Unfortunately, the overhang is not huge, and so we're not able to get the bike parking underneath that overhang. It would make this entrance area much too crowded. We've prioritized putting some benches underneath the overhang and the stroller parking underneath the overhang, as well as a kind of entry and gathering area. This front lawn of the school is really designed as an entrance to the school, but also a place where the school continues to build a sense of community. Parents and children and teachers are expected to sort of gather there, chat before and after school. And this little area here, this green area, is an area where the children could play as parents are talking. They can play in a kind of safe environment. I think that covers that slide. This slide is is a bit of a diagram of indicating the number of trees that are removed. They're shown in orange. I think our different reports have different numbers for the trees that are being removed, and some of them, if there's any concern or doubt about that, we're happy to take that up with the landscape subcommittee to ensure that we have a good conversation about how to protect as many trees as possible. Those trees that are shown in green here are the ones that we're preserving, again reinforcing that idea that these are character-defining trees, and our goal is to preserve them for the site. And then here's that alley of trees on the east side of the building. Half of these are existing, and half of them will become a new line of trees. This is the area I'm focusing now on this next slide, in this stand of pine trees at that corner, and I'm just showing a diagram that shows the root system of that tree, that cluster of trees. In yellow here, it shows how that root system already is penetrating a little bit below the 4-foot sidewalk that we're proposing. And if we were to extend that sidewalk, you can probably can't see it too clearly on your diagram, but if we were to extend that sidewalk, we're worried that the extension of that will damage the roots of these trees and ultimately lead to the demise of those trees. This is a rendering looking from the south toward the north, just to reinforce that setback issue. As I said, it's 49 feet from the face of the curb to the building. The building is at its lowest point right here along that sidewalk. It gently slopes up toward the middle of the site. And then this is a view from the north, looking back to the south. This shows that apron of cobble that we have agreed with the staff report to adopt the cobble pavement treatment here. The concrete sidewalk goes through that area. So you can see the front area of the playground. Here's that setback from Broadmead. And again, as I said, this is where the building is really at its lowest, and then it rises slowly toward the entrance. Just briefly, I'm going to point out some of the features of the plan. It's organized into these two wings, as I talked about. There's a western wing and an eastern wing. All of the on the eastern wing, these green-colored areas are the preschool classrooms. On the western wing, the blue are the infant classrooms, and the yellow are the toddler classrooms. As I said, the majority of these classrooms look out to the playground area, and the building is organized so that as soon as you come in, you're moving from the landscape and the garden at the entrance and quickly move through to the landscape and the garden of the playground area. These areas in yellow, there's a large multi-purpose room, some gathering spaces, small library areas, and an art room right off the lobby of the building. Service, mechanical, and faculty and staff offices are over here on the northern side of the eastern wing. This architectural set of diagrams of the elevations are intended to show the relatively low scale of the building, the extensive amount of natural light that we're bringing into the building, and the sort of slopes of the roofs. This top one here is the elevation facing onto the lot 22, the parking lot to the north. This one just below it is the elevation facing Broadmead Street. The third one down is the elevation facing the playground. Here's, as I pointed out in those renderings, where the slope of the roof gently comes down on the Broadmead side. And then last one here would be the elevation looking from the west to the east, and you're seeing the multi-purpose room here. These are kind of technical, so these really are the drawings, I think, as you would experience the building. This is the arrival sequence of the building with the grass in the front. You'll see the wood materials of wood siding and the underside of that overhang. This is about 17 foot 8 inches, the height of that overhang. This is that large porch with benches and covered area for the strollers. When you enter the building from the north, you would enter into the main lobby. There would be reception here on the left, a gathering area at the entrance area, a slight ramp that goes down to the lower level to the toddler and preschool classrooms. Here's that art classroom. But immediately when you enter, you're seeing out to the landscape. Then on the south side of the building, looking back toward the north, we're looking at the western wing here, the eastern wing off to the right, and looking back at the multipurpose room and the high ceiling over the art room and that entrance lobby.
And just for the record, that was slide 15, and we're now moving to slide 16.
I won't go into detail of the playground area, but the playground is really designed like an outdoor classroom. We have had a lot of conversations and special consultants on this area, and it's meant to provide a range of activities from just kicking a ball around in the grassy areas to playground equipment that's specifically designed for the ages of infants or toddlers or preschool children. So you can see a variety of things here: swings, playground equipment, slides, and planters, things like that. The building is on track to be certified for LEED Gold. So I think that was one of the aspirational recommendations from one of the reports, and we are confident that we'll achieve LEED Gold. It has a handful of very fundamental sustainability strategies, primarily having to do with the orientation that I started with. There is a super-insulated envelope around the building. The overhang to the south protects the sun. We have photovoltaics on the roof of the building that provide about 60% of the energy required for the facility, and operable windows to encourage natural ventilation throughout the facility. So we think it's a very well-designed building from these aspects of sustainability. This is, I think, really going to reiterate what I just talked about: the insulation of the envelope, the cross ventilation, the solar system on the roof, the overhangs, and the east-west orientation. That is it for the presentation. What I'd like to do now is take a few minutes and go through comments from the report and give you some response. I'll respond to several of the reports. I'll hand it off to Tom O'Shea, and in his testimony he'll respond to some of the other ones. So I'm going to pick it up on the responses to the comments by the landscape review. On page 2, comment 5 recommended an evergreen landscape for the parking area. Tom will also talk about this, but we think that the taking advantage of this existing mature landscape satisfies a requirement to have evergreen ground cover for every 25 parking spaces. We will have no more than 14 parking spaces exposed between landscape areas. So we think that the design of the building, again, based on the existing mature landscape, will satisfy the intent of that piece of the comment. The other comment on landscape has to do with page 2, comment 7, regarding the width of the walk on the north side. As I mentioned in my presentation, we prefer to keep that sidewalk at 4 feet in order to protect the existing trees. On page 4, this is the Princeton Planning Review, page 3, section 7.1, regarding the curb on the north side of the parking. Again, that's the same comment, that we prefer to keep it at 4 feet in order to protect the tree. Page 3, section 7.1.d addresses the issue of the placement, recommends the placement of a crosswalk. Let me clarify this. The comments on the placement of a crosswalk in the center of Lot 22, and we agree that crosswalk should not be in the plan because it's really not connecting to sidewalks. Regarding this next comment is page 3, section 7.1.f, moving the building to the west. We have, as I pointed out, already moved the building to the west from the position that was located when we met with you during the concept reviews. And if any trees are impacted, we will relocate and transplant those trees. The next comment, page 3.
A point of information,
in terms of that movement, is that shown on the submitted plans or just on the plans you presented tonight?
It's submitted, it's shown on the current submission. It was not shown at concept review, but it's on the current plans.
Okay, thank you.
The next comment, page 3, section 7.1.h, eliminating a spillway. I'm going to defer this comment to Tom O'Shea, and he'll address this one. The next comment, page 3, section 7.1.I, regarding light bollards in the playground. We would like to refer that to the landscape subcommittee and work with them to develop a good lighting strategy for the playground. The next comment, page 4, sections 9.1.d, considering permeable pavers, the applicant will not, we will not use permeable pavers because we are compliant with our stormwater guidelines. Permeable pavers are just one strategy that one can adopt to meet stormwater requirements. We're meeting the stormwater requirements by a variety of other strategies, and so the permeable pavers are not required. Next comment, page 4, section 9.1.k, considering charging stations for electric vehicles. We will consider charging stations as part of our overall parking plan. These are things that Kim Jackson has under consideration. So we do not make decisions on a project-by-project basis. We make decisions on a campus-wide basis. Next, I'd like to turn to the SPRAB review dated August 28th, 2015. Comment 3, regarding the north parking lot sidewalks. Again, I've addressed this in earlier comments. Comment 4, regarding crosswalk in the center of the lot. Again, I've addressed this in an earlier comment. Comment 6, moving the building to the west. Again, I've addressed this in an earlier comment. Comment 8, regarding the eliminating the spillway. I will refer that to Tom O'Shea. Comment 9, regarding the style of light bollards in the playground. We would like to, again, review that with the landscape subcommittee. Next, turning to the Princeton Environmental Commission review dated July 21, 2015. Regarding, under landscape, section A, comment 1, regarding native species, we will use only native or adaptive species. Regarding comment 4, regarding the inclusion of landscape strips as vegetated swales to mitigate stormwater runoff, our proposal is a landscape-based stormwater strategy. We're using landscape to manage the stormwater on the site in that southern area of the site that I referred to. So we do not need the vegetated swales that are recommended in this comment. Comment 5, regarding the permeable pavers. I mentioned just a minute ago that we will not include these permeable pavers. We're able to meet our stormwater guidelines without them. Under the category of general building, comment number 1, include space and containers in and around building for composting organic waste. We will not be composting organic waste at this time, but we may consider it in the future. Comment 2, regarding the installation of 0.8 gallon per flush low-flow toilets. We will not use these toilets. We propose to use the standard toilet we use on campus, which are low flow. They are between 1.0 and 1.8 GPF. And these go toward meeting the overall LEED credit for a 30% reduction in domestic water for building. So in other words, we may disagree with a particular prescription here, but we are achieving LEED Gold by a combination of strategies. Comment 3, regarding improving the energy efficiency and reducing the CO2. Sub-bullet number 1, regarding LED lamps. A portion of our lighting will be LED, but not all of it. Comment point 2, regarding Energy Star appliances. We will comply where possible. Point 3, Energy Star mechanical equipment. We have energy efficient system. However, Energy Star ratings are usually applied to residential mechanical equipment and are not available for the types of systems that we're specifying. Item 4.0, Energy Star windows and doors. Energy efficient doors and windows are provided, but they're not Energy Star rated. Item 5, Energy Star walls and roof insulation. The insulation envelopes will meet requirements outlined by this comment. Roman numeral 4, comment 4, regarding covered and secured bike parking and shower facilities. We will not be providing covered bike parking. This is something we don't do on campus, and as I pointed out, we're crowded in that entrance. And again, we have a campus-wide strategy for providing showers where they can do the most, where they have the most benefit. So, for example, the new Anlinger Center for Energy and the Environment, which will be opening soon, is a building that has a large number of bikers there, and so that's a strategic location to provide bike showers. But we will not provide them in this facility. Roman numeral 5, comment 5, regarding the protected bike and stroller parking. The stroller parking is protected by the overhead canopy and by a sub-canopy over the strollers, but not by the building itself, and by the building itself. Roman numeral 6, comment 6, regarding expansion for bike and stroller parking. We will definitely consider the need for expanding the bike parking or stroller parking if required for the future. This is something we do in our buildings all the time. We're always looking at the sort of demand at our buildings on campus and expanding bike parking when we see that kind of demand where it makes sense. Comment, Roman numeral 7, comment 7, regarding charge stations for electric vehicles. I've commented on this above. Roman numeral 8, comment 8, regarding construction of an indoor air quality management plan. We are complying with most of the requirements outlined in the addendum. Comment 9, regarding recycled demolition materials, minimum 75%. Our project requires no demolition, and so this really does not apply. Comment 10, regarding FSC lumber. We will not be utilizing FSC lumber. Comment 11, regarding avoiding red list materials. We will avoid red list materials wherever possible. Comment 12, using green building materials and finishes. We will use green building materials and finishes wherever possible. In the addendum, Roman numeral 1, regarding red list, I would simply refer to the comment we made above. Regarding on Roman numeral 2, the construction IAQ plan, I have commented on that above. And the comment, Roman numeral 3, healthy building network, materials overview. The applicant will avoid materials listed in the addendum wherever possible. I think those are the comments that I wanted to make. I will now turn it over to Tom, and he can go through some presentation and also address other comments.
Yep. So Tom O'Shea was already sworn in. Alan, I'm not sure, did we mark this as Exhibit A1? Should we mark the whole slide presentation with, I think we're up to slide 21 now, and we have a total of 24 or 23? 23 slides. So do you want to mark the whole package as A1?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll mark the whole slide presentation as A1, which includes 23 slides, and Tom's going to be starting off with slide number 21.
Thank you, Chris.
I guess we should qualify Mr. O'Shea.
Yes.
He's been sworn in.
I'm a licensed professional engineer in the state of New Jersey, worked for the firm Van Oat Harvey Associates, and have been working on Princeton University projects since the mid-1980s, and I've appeared before this board many times.
Thank you, Tom. We accept your credentials.
Thank you. The child care project is located on Lot 18, Block 50.01, which is a 140-acre lot, which essentially goes from Washington Road to the west side of Broadmead, to the rear of the houses that are on Harrison Street, from Faculty Road to the south, essentially to Western Way to the north. The project has two variances that we're going to be asking for. One is the size of the parking stalls in the parking lot 22. Your ordinance requires 9 by 19, and we're asking for 9 by 18, which is what we typically do. It helps reduce impervious surface, and it's adequate. The other variance that we're asking for is relative to providing one vegetated parking space if you have a parking lot of greater than 25 cars. Well, our parking lot is 45 cars with handicap spaces, and you can see by the layout when we preserve the existing sycamore trees or London plane trees on lot 22, we have small areas of parking. The largest run of parking that we have, which is northeast of the building, is only 14 spaces. So we would say that we meet the spirit of that ordinance in that we have not a large bank of parking. We're providing vegetation or preserving vegetation within the parking lot. Earlier, there was a comment about a crosswalk. If you recall at Concept, we had a crosswalk in the middle of parking lot 22 that didn't connect to anything. What we decided to do, and it was part of the comments in staff report, is the entrance to the parking lots on both Broadmead and Fitzrandolph were really treated like parking lots. So we have the hammered cobble aprons on either side that help slow traffic down. We have a concrete sidewalk through that area to provide access. So we eliminated that crosswalk. In staff report, there's a suggestion to have a crosswalk from our side of Broadmead, the west side of Broadmead, over to the east side of Broadmead, over by where the swim club is. And we really don't want to do that. We're discouraging that. Among other reasons is there is no sidewalk on the east side of Broadmead Street. Next slide, please. This slide is the grading plan that's part of the packet, and what you see is the layout of the site, the stormwater management facility, and the stormwater management facility does use landscape-based solutions with stormwater, and we do have swales that run through the site. We just don't have a swale up on the parking lot. The spillway currently is located on the eastern side of the stormwater management biofiltration swale, and we can't eliminate that, but what we would like to do is work with staff to naturalize those grades, and I think that's the right way to handle that. The reason why you have a spillway is stormwater management facilities are designed for a particular storm, 100-year storm, and there's freeboard associated. But when you have an event that's larger than a 100-year storm, which we've had a number of times, at least since I've been working, you want to control where the water discharges if the system is overtopped, and that's the purpose of the spillway. We want it at a particular location. So again, we're suggesting that we work with staff on that. The stormwater management facility is dealing with a project area which is approximately 3.7 acres. We're picking up almost 0.7 acres of existing impervious surface, and there's a 0.6 acre addition of impervious surface. The system treats infiltration, TSS removal, and peak rate reductions and groundwater recharge. As Ron said, we're compliant with municipal, county, and state requirements, as well as meeting Princeton University's campus goals for stormwater. Next slide, please. This is the utility plan for the site, and just briefly describing how the utilities work for the site. Water, electric, gas, and sanitary all feed or go to Broadmead Street, Broadmead. Telephone is really served through OIT, which is the campus fiber optic, and that comes in from the western side and is located on the north portion of the building. So if you look at the plan, there's a line that runs across the page. It has OIT, that's the fiber optic. The lighting on the site, what is proposed are the university gas lamp fixture, which is what is located in that area. And the type of light that we use in that now is an 85-watt induction lamp, which provides some energy savings. And there was a comment about switching over to LED. Currently, LED is not available in the university gas lamp fixture. I'm assuming in the future, if trends continue the way they will, LED will be available and will change the lights out at some time in the future. Ron talked about the lighting in the playground area, and we'd like to work with staff and the landscape subcommittee on the lighting in the playground area. With regard to signage, there a comment about providing signage for school, crossing, etc. And we've had a subsequent conversation with Brian Stankus, and he agrees that that is not a requirement for a child care center. So we're not proposing any school crossing signs. There are some old school signs for when 171 was a school, not when it was a child care center, so we'll remove all the old school signs in and around 171 Broadmead. Any of our signage will be in accordance with the MUTCD, and we'll work with staff on that. Ron covered pretty well the sidewalk along the northern side of parking lot 22 and our request to keep that at 4 feet. And I would say that we would work with staff on that as well as the township arborist to make sure that's the right thing at that location. Like Ron, as he concluded his presentation, there were a number of things in the various reports that I just wanted to touch base on to make sure that we have it as a matter of record. In going through the staff engineering and zoning report dated July 15th, 2015, on page 3, there's the comment about the evergreen ground cover in the parking space, and that's one of the variances that we're requesting for the reason why I enunciated previously. On page 5, section 4, we talk about the school crossing signage, and again, we'll be in compliance with the MUTCD. We don't believe that it's required. On page 6, section 6, item 2, the sidewalk width on the north side of the parking lot. Again, Ron spoke about that, and I think we work with staff. Page 6, section 6, item 3, regarding the sidewalk to the crosswalk midpoint of the parking lot in 22, we've eliminated that, so that's a non-issue anymore. Page 6, item 6, the driveway entrance material, just so that you know, there was conflicting data as the project was submitted, whether there was a concrete apron there or not, and SPRAB did request, and we're going to provide the hammer cobbled at that location. Page 6, item 6, section 6, item 7, LED lighting I touched base upon, and I also touched base upon the elimination of the spillway. Our offer is to really naturalize the grades there because we need a spillway. In Brian Stankus's report dated May 15th, there were 2 items, both of which I talked about. One is the Broadmead crosswalk. We are not an advocate of that. And the signage, the school signage in front of 171 Broadmead. I think with that, those were the items that I wanted to cover. Thank you.
Thanks, and that's what we have for our direct testimony today. We spent a little time going through, clarifying some of the comments. The reports were lengthy, and there was a number of lots of other comments, and we agreed to all of those. We just focused on the ones that we thought we needed a little bit more clarification, give you a little bit reasoning behind what we were thinking in our design and planning. But that's it with our direct presentation and our witnesses.
Thank you. Board members, do you have any questions for Mr. McCoy, Mr. O'Shea? Mr. Reed?
Yeah, as I looked over the plans and watched the presentation, I couldn't find any reference to the existing building where the daycare is taking place. What happens to that?
The status of that building will be determined by the 2026 campus planning effort that we're doing right now. So we have no plans right now to reoccupy it. It will be dependent upon what we determine in the campus planning effort that we have underway. It has partially occupied by OIT. OIT will stay in the parts that they occupy.
Who's OID?
I'm sorry, Office of Information Technology.
All right. But it's just going to sit there?
It will sit there.
It sounds like another Valley Road school. That we were doing this beautiful building, and then we take the building it replaces, and we're not tearing it down, we're not boarding it up, we
don't do this often, but we did do it for the project that we call 20 Washington. After chemistry moved out of that building and moved down the hill to the new facility, 20 Washington was unoccupied for quite some time until we had designed the new use for that building. So it's not we don't like to mothball buildings. We'll take care of them while they're in the kind of transition, but we honestly just don't know what the future is for that building. We don't want to occupy it and then have to move people out. That's not a way to manage our spaces.
Well, it would help if we had some better idea as to, at least in the meantime, how the existing building is treated so that it doesn't become unattractive to the neighbors around it.
That's a good point. We would treat it as if it was an occupied building. We're not going to just abandon it and let it...
I mean, what you're doing with the chemistry building is amazing. And probably maybe it took that much time in order to come up with the good design that seems to be emerging there.
Yeah.
But at least we have some indication at this site that similar plans are made for reuse and repurposing of that building.
Yeah. We were able to move the chemistry down to the new building, and then after some time begin construction on the new building, because it was part of the 2016 campus plan. We knew what we were doing with that building. It's just by the circumstance of timing, we're in the middle of our 2026 campus plan, and we don't know the status of 171 Broadweed. So we just can't make any commitment on what we're going to do there.
Anywhere from 2016 to 2026.
Pardon me?
It could be any time between 2016 and 2026 before that campus plan becomes evident as to how, and maybe the building is just marked for reuse and maintained for reuse, but there's some indication that you're going to responsibly maintain it.
I would just like to also point out, it's not completely being vacant. There's close to 50, maybe 52 staff members in the Office of Information Technology, so it's not going to be an abandoned building. It's going to be used, and any future use is going to be evaluated as part of the campus plan.
Well, that's a good indication.
did you want, no, Mrs. Stratman.
It doesn't have to do with the structure of the building, environmental needs and all of that, but I'm curious to know why the change to operate for university-related kids only. I mean, and by the way, when you say university-related only, I'm assuming you mean anyone employed by the university or associated in any way from top to bottom.
Right, anybody employed by the university.
Right, but why you're now just the change to university-related only?
Well, currently there are two child care facilities there. We have a letter of intent with one of them to operate this facility. The other one will continue to operate, but just in a different location. And we've chosen to focus on this facility on the children of the university community as part of a benefit for working with the university. If there's space available after all the university needs are met, and then those spaces could be considered for the general public.
But it will depend on the number of. Then will that be determined annually, or how far in advance would you know?
I'm not an expert on the operations of the building. We'll have room for 180 children. Mm-hmm. And it'll fit into the normal cycle of enrollment into the school.
Board members, Mr. Cohen?
I have two questions and one comment. So I understand the bike racks can't fit under the overhang, but I didn't see an alternate location, and I'm wondering if you could point out where you think bike racks might go.
Sure. The bike racks are lined up on the entry porch right here. So this semicircle is a paved area, which is the entrance to the building. You can't see it probably, but the dotted line of the overhang is over on this side of that area. So this is where they'll be. They'll be front and center, easily accessed. We can expand them in different ways. It's just too crowded to get them underneath the covered part.
Okay. The solar panels that you were mentioning going on the roof, are those going to be angled to orient more directly to the sun, or are they going to be flat on the roof?
They're more or less flat, so it's an approach that provides the solar energy for the building that we need. But it also is a little bit more pleasing to look at when they're sort of tucked on the roof. You sacrifice a little bit of efficiency from the panels that way.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And the comment I have is in terms of that contentious crosswalk that got eliminated from the middle of the driveway. I understand that it didn't really make sense where it was because it wasn't connecting any sidewalks, but it does seem like it's a very long walk now for people in some of those parking spaces to get to the front entry if they have to go all the way over to the crosswalk across the driveway at Broadmead. And I don't know if there's any other possible way for people to get, not only, it looks like people will have to walk between parked cars even to get onto the sidewalk network at all if they're parked across the way and they choose to walk across the driveway instead of going over to the crosswalk. Mm-hmm. So I'd like for somebody to reflect on that.
And answer you? Reflect or answer?
Well, actually, I think it's more for the professionals, I guess. They're the ones who are talking about getting rid of this sidewalk, and I'm wondering what they had in mind when they were saying that let's get rid of this crosswalk because it doesn't connect anything. Were you thinking,
No,
we
actually recommended that it stay and that it be connected. as opposed to eliminating it. So we propose that you would have a sidewalk to connect both ends of that crosswalk.
To the crosswalk, to the sidewalk network, okay, and I didn't address not why you didn't do that.
Right, we want to minimize pedestrian traffic across the root balls of these large trees. So that's why we don't want to bring sidewalks across those root balls. So if we don't have the sidewalks across the root balls, then the crossing in the middle of the lot doesn't make sense.
And there's to me is, you have the traffic calming on either side. This is a parking lot. I'm sorry, you've got the traffic calming on either side with the aprons and cobbles, that this is really a small parking lot for the people entering the building, and it's not unusual for them to cross over the island. My concern, among the things that I think, just the way that I would walk, is I wouldn't walk behind my car to a crosswalk to then cross the aisle, which is really what you would have, is if we had thank you, if you had a crosswalk right at that location, or just move it right down there, is my guess is that the people who are parked on the north side won't be walking to that crosswalk, but will be walking diagonally across the parking lot to either where the handicap ramp area is between the handicap parking spaces. I think that's how they'll function. So I don't think it's a really useful thing in the middle of a parking lot. If this was a road, not a parking lot, I'd tend to agree with you.
Any other board members? I mean, I assume that if in the process of using this building, you find that a crosswalk is needed, that you will install a crosswalk in the appropriate place. Certainly makes sense. Okay. I'm going to open this up to members of the public.
Tim had a comment.
I'm sorry, Tim.
That's much better, thank you. A question about the traffic reports, specifically in the report that our consultant reviewing your report, I don't know whether you have a copy of the report, item 20, where it says we request the applicant comment on the issue of university personnel who park on Broadmead and apparently are not parking where they're supposed to park. And I have a question about OIT has 50 employees in 171 right now, the existing building. Oh, sorry. Where do they park? On the street? Again, my concern, which I raised in the concept review, is the Broadmead pool parking across the street. And I know that this child care center operates year-round, so I would imagine that there would be times when pool parking and daycare center traffic would be on the same street at the same time. And I don't see any indication in any of these reports about the impact of pool traffic.
We can certainly have our traffic engineer talk to it, or Tom could address it, but what's great about this project is we're taking an existing facility and just shifting across the street. The size isn't getting any bigger. In fact, the number of students are actually decreasing. So we're projecting the same exact traffic patterns. The office that's there right now, the technology office, is going to have the same number of employees. We're not envisioning any change there. So we're expecting the exact same pattern. That's why both traffic engineers didn't see many issues or any, problems with the current or projected flow.
Yeah, except I noticed that their counts were done in May and April when I would assume that the pool is not operable, and it doesn't factor in I don't know whether the enrollment is seasonal, whether there are fewer students on site in the summer months. It's just a concern that I have as someone who used to be a member of the pool and knows what the traffic situation is like, especially in the afternoons when I imagine that people would be picking up their kids.
Good evening. My name is...
have to have you sworn in.
Yes.
This is George Giacomar. He is a traffic engineer, and George, why don't you just give him real brief your qualifications?
I've been...
Let me first swear Mr. Giacomar in. Do you swear or affirm to testify truthfully?
I do.
Thank you.
Good evening. I've been working as a traffic consultant for the university for 25 years. I started working in Princeton in 1982 for Palmer Square North as a parking and traffic consultant. I think to address your point, yes, we did do the surveys in May, but the purpose of the surveys that we did was to determine the parking demand of the child care center itself. The main purpose was to figure out how many spaces we need for the parent drop-off and pick-up, was not necessarily to count the number of people at the pool. But I think, as was mentioned, it's important to realize the overall parking demand in that area will not change. It actually will tend to decrease very slightly. So whatever we see today during that peak pool season will be the same in the future. And I think if there are other changes that may happen, the university will always monitor it, and there will be mechanisms. If that were to become a real problem, and there wouldn't be any parking for the pool people, I think there are mechanisms to change the regulations on the portion of Broadmead if that's necessary. But at this point, we don't think that there's a need for any change because the overall demands will not change. And the university has the ability to assign the employees to Lot 21. And I realize, as the people from OIT are doing today, they do park on Broadmead. And we don't see a problem with that. It does tend to slow down traffic on Broadmead if you have cars parked there, as opposed to a street that doesn't have any parking at all.
Okay. As long as you keep an eye on it, there's concern because now this is a two-way street. The parking lot 22 is a two-way thoroughfare that's now one-way, and people who do go to the pool park in what I assume are current spots that are reserved for U-League and U-Now in 171. So that's something to consider.
Yes.
Anyone else before I invite the public to comment? Are there members of the public who would like to comment or ask questions? Seeing none, I'll close the public session. And board members, do you want any further thoughts, questions, comments? Mrs. Crumriller.
Everything seems pretty thorough to me. It seems like a good plan.
I think that the question of the two-way street was brought up by staff for discussion by us. Do you want to elaborate on your concerns?
No, I think in Brian's report, he just kind of pointed out that now that it's going to be two-way, it slightly changes the traffic pattern, and there'll be a little bit more traffic on one street, less on the other. But I think overall, he really didn't have any concerns with it because overall there's no increase in traffic.
And so I think we have two variances to consider. One having to do with the size of the parking stalls, another having to do with the requirement for vegetated areas in the parking. If anybody wants to comment or worry about those. There what?
There are a few conditions.
There are more than a few conditions. Do you want to elaborate on those?
Just generally, I guess the main conditions are those in all the staff reports and in the committee reports. other than those to which the applicant has stated objections and explained how they are handling the issues either differently or not at all, but mainly differently. I think the board or the applicant said that they would continue to review that issue of the width of the sidewalk on the north side of the lot. They prefer the 4 feet, but they'll continue to review that with staff. And I guess that could also be referred to the landscape subcommittee. I guess there's somewhere in the reports that there's conflict as to the cobble apron with the concrete sidewalk, and that should be reconciled as a cobble apron with a concrete sidewalk. The applicant says they will review with staff the issue of the eliminating the spillway, and I guess that's with the engineering department or with Mr. Our stormwater management consultant. And his report, the technical report from SWM, will be made a condition of the approval. The applicants also said that they'll review the issue of light bollards in the playground with the landscape subcommittee. And they will monitor the need for expanding stroller parking and bike parking in the future. The applicant also, as a condition, will, if the alley of trees along Broadmead, if they're damaged, that they'll be either replaced or moved. And I think the resolution and perhaps of the crosswalk across the parkway is that it won't be initially installed, but if needed in the future, it will be installed. The applicant also, I guess, will maintain the existing 171 as if it were continued to be fully occupied.
Do I hear a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Second, Mr. Quinn. Mrs. Crumiller? Mrs. Crutonio, do you want to call the roll, please?
Ms. Crumiller?
Yes.
Mr. Reed?
Yes.
Mrs. Trotman?
Yes.
Mrs. Ullman?
Yes.
Mr. Cohn?
Yes.
Mr. Quinn?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Sometimes they just want to see what's
All right, everyone, if we could come back into session, we have one more application this evening. This is an amended minor subdivision with variance, and it's 227 Ridgeview Road, Block 501, Lot 14. It's Michael and Barbara Blumenthal. And Lee, do you want to take us through this?
Yes, Mr. Solo, do you swear or affirm to testify truthfully in this application?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you, and good evening. I'm going to talk a little bit about this application. Back in April of this year, the board granted minor subdivision with variance approval to the Blumenthals to subdivide their 15.39 acre parcel into 2 lots. This is an amended application. I'm going to start, and we'll label this as PB1. This is the original application that we approved. Let me orient everybody. To the right and south, this is Ridgeview Road. To my left and the north is Cherry Valley Road. Ridgeview Circle is right here, sort of in the middle of the map. And as I indicated, this is a 15.39 acre parcel, and they were going to create 2 lots. New lot 14.01 was to be 4.39 acres and contain the existing house, and that's the front portion of it. The rear portion was to become lot 14.02 and contain approximately 10.99 acres. The rear lot has no frontage on a public street, but was going to be preserved permanently and not built on and become open space. Access to the back lot on new lot 1402 was to be provided via a 15-foot wide access easement, and that's highlighted in orange here along the eastern edge of the new lot 14.01. Condition 1 of the board's approval required that lot 14.02 be deeded to the New Jersey Conservation Foundation and retained as open space, and that a pedestrian access easement be provided across lot to lot 14.02. Which brings us to the amended. So as you can see from the map, the lot configuration is not changing. You still have the front lot and the rear lot. It's still being dedicated as open space. The front lot will still be 4.39 acres, and the back lot 1402, 10.99. The amended application moves the access easement approximately 215 feet to the west and places it on lot 401, which the applicant also owns. So you can see in orange again is the new access easement to the west of lot 1401. The applicant owns the adjacent property, and that will now provide access to the rear lot as required by the resolution, but it's a little different, so they had to come back to the board for permission for it. No other changes from the original application are being proposed. The only staff comment we've asked the applicant to clarify, and I think they have subsequently in some revised deed language, which Mr. Porter maybe can comment on, that the access is a public access to the rear of the lot. That's a quick summary of what it's all about. Again, the lot sizes aren't changing. The rear lot will still remain as open space. The access easement is shifting about 200 feet to the west. Again, Mr. Bridger, Mr. West are here if you have other questions, but that's a quick summary of this application. I don't know if you have questions for me or to turn it over to the applicant.
Any questions, anyone? Yes, Mr. Reed?
I got lost in the woods. Help me. It's a large area in the back that is now going to be deeded over to the New Jersey Conservation Foundation. Is that
That's
right?
correct, and that's what was originally proposed as well.
Originally proposed. And they're responsible to the extent that the space needs any tree removal or tree care or whatever.
Any maintenance liability, it is not a public park, it is not a municipal responsibility.
It probably doesn't require much, but from time to time it requires something. Now, what's the access for the Conservation Foundation to get back there?
They've switched it. Originally, it was a 15-foot wide easement along the eastern edge of proposed lot 4.01. It will now be on the adjacent lot, so it's not on the original lot.
Oh, I
but
see.
the adjacent lot is also owned by the Blumenthals, so they've moved it off of this lot and are placing it here. It provides very similar access to the rear lot. It's just
It's like
been
a
moved to a different lot.
cross-hatching.
Staff couldn't approve it without them coming here.
It's like a cross-hatching.
The crosshatch on your plan, I've colored it
Yeah.
in orange on this map.
Okay, I see where it is.
But is that it's not a paved,
No, I think the intent is if any clearing is needed, they would. The easement speaks that while it's a 15-foot wide easement, they would provide like a 6-foot wide area to make certain people can actually walk back there. I obviously haven't walked it, so I don't know whether they need to do clearing. We would probably urge them not to, that people sort of wiggle their way as opposed to just a clear 6-foot shot.
and is there parking near, on that the
No.
street? There's no parking on the street?
Ooh, I don't know. Jack, do you know?
I mean,
The
if people
applicant
wanted to
could
go on that land,
It's-
how would they do it?
It's a very narrow street, so I don't know whether you can park. I don't think it says no parking, but I don't know if I'd leave my car on that street.
I'm not sure if parking is allowed on the street.
I wasn't so concerned about it as open space for the public use, but I wanted to know that the foundation could have access if they needed, for some reason, needed to get back there.
Yeah. David, did you?
Well, I just, is it a secret why they wanted to move the access? Or it's none of our
I'd rather
business?
the applicant
or-
address that rather than me. They did share that, but I think it's up to the applicant to answer that one.
Okay, well, if there are no more questions, maybe we should hear from the applicant.
I'm sorry, was that a question?
Yeah.
Why they're moving it?
Yeah.
I think the applicant can address that. It has to do with the sale of the existing house on the lot on which the easement already was placed.
If no other questions, we'll turn it over to the applicant.
Richard Schatzman, attorney for the applicant.
Yeah.
Sorry. Richard Schatzman, attorney for the applicant.
Mr. Schatzman, to the extent you
I
are
do.
providing testimony, do you swear or affirm to testify truthfully?
I do.
Thank you.
Answering Mr. Cohn's question, the answer is that the pathway is discovered to be too close to the bedroom of the house on 237 and would interfere with the privacy of the people who are going to buy 237. So it's relocated on 239, which is also owned by the applicant, where it's sort of isolated. Answering Ms. Cromo's question, there's going to be no paving, there's going to be no lights. I've supplied Mr. Porter with the New Jersey Conservation easement, and it has those provisions in there that they solely maintain it, and if they have to clear, as Mr. Saul said, 6 feet, they will, but they want to keep everything natural. So you walk through the woods,
Will there be signage?
There'll be markers showing where the path is.
I mean, will there be a little sign that says open to the public?
No, not that I know of.
I mean, so basically, it's going to be preserved area, but
Right.
nobody can really use it.
Yes, well, if you want to walk about, if you want to hike from Ridgeview Road, I'm sure you can. That's why we have an easement. It's a trail.
Yeah, perhaps the Conservation Foundation, in its literature,
Yeah, we'll
shows
probably,
where their open
yeah, we'll
space
probably
is.
advertise it as a, why don't you go hiking on Ridgeview Road by the preserve there? It's all that woods in back there is all preserved as well.
Right,
So
I
I
mean-
understand it.
Right.
Let me just say, it's no different from the application we approved.
I know, I wasn't, I missed that approval, but, I mean, I assume this is going off the tax rolls. I mean, the rear part. So that's why I was just asking, if the public, if we could make it maybe more accessible to the public. But I understand that it was already approved, so.
I actually thought I remembered some discussion of having a little sign on Ridgeview indicating that there was a public access easement. But
Well,
it may not be in
take it
the...
up with the New Jersey Conservation Foundation. Apropos of that, there is a letter dated September 1st, 2015, RAID, donation of land to New Jersey Conservation Foundation, property, block 501, lot 14.02, Prince of Mercer County. To whom it may concern, this will confirm that the New Jersey Conservation Foundation accepts the new 15-foot wide pedestrian access easement across block 401, lot 6, as the new plan, amended plan shows, as an adequate means of public access. Block 501, lot 14.02, which is the rear lot, in accordance with the deed of trail easement provided for landowner's signature. Thank you, sincerely, Lisa McCallum, Assistant Director, Land Acquisition. So I'd like to mark this as A1, whoever marks exhibits for the record. And that's it.
Okay. Are there any other questions? I think we have to at least have a public. So with that, let me open it up to the public. Is there anyone here who'd like to address this amended application? Anyone? No? All right, hearing none, let me close the public portion, and is there any further discussion? Anyone? Good, I'd like to entertain a motion then to...
Just explain this.
All right, Mr. Porter has something that he wants to explain.
Yeah, I guess we can, we were asked to see if we could expedite the approval, and I have distributed a findings of fact. So in lieu of a motion to approve, there could be a motion to adopt the findings of fact. Given that Mr. Solo had two exhibits rather than one, we'll modify didn't you have two? One with the old and one with the new?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll modify that language in the findings, and we'll add the exhibit, the reference to Exhibit A1. But essentially, it's the findings you had with those changes. So,
Okay, so...
I, Gail Ullman, I move the approval of the findings of fact for this amended subdivision application.
The corrected findings of fact.
The corrected findings of fact for the amended.
Okay. And could I have a second for that?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Cohn. Do you want to call the roll on that, please?
Ms. Kremiller?
Since I wasn't there, I'm asking if I can vote, since I wasn't at the first hearing. I'll just abstain.
I think so.
Mr. Reed?
Yes.
Mrs. Trotman?
Yes.
Mrs. Ullman?
Yes?
Mrs. Gunning?
Yes.
Mr. Cohn?
Yes.
Mr. Quinn?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If anyone isn't going to save their university transit report, you can give it to me, and I can give it to Celia Burge for the Environmental Commission, in case she can't, well, she carries them all there.
Okay, and I would entertain a motion to end the meeting.
Motion to adjourn?
Yes.
Second.
I'll let him do it this time.
Can let him do that?
I'll
All right.
allow him to do it this time.
Stepping into your shoes.
Or watch it in the future.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Good night.